and maybe the first one that struck me the most was this notion of who is we, because Mladen, of course, kind of, he put us into a perspective that maybe we didn't see before, because we were just, everybody connected so much emotionally with this Yugofuturism, and I think that this is really important, and this is also the reason why I, among other things, invited you, so that maybe we broaden up also this talking about a common history or a common future, or who is this we in the common. So maybe this would be my first thing that came up from listening all of you together. And I think that when we, of course, Yugofuturism is maybe a sexy concept, but I really think that Yugo in the Yugofuturism can be broader than Yugoslavia. And this is also why I would agree that maybe nostalgia is too much. It's too much for me to bear it as a positive concept, as something that can bring up still something. I mean, it can in this affective level, on the level of how we pose ourselves to something, or that we have this desire and so on. But so I don't know, maybe if you have some thoughts on this, who is the we in the Yugofuturism?
Just because it sounds really, maybe I said it this way to make it more, fun, but it's not about the concept being sexy, it's about the investment into the concept. I mean it in the sense of Lyotard, for example, when he discusses exactly libidinal investment, like kind of notions, movements, practices that kind of take the imagination of, let's say, of people and are charged with desire, are charged with aliveness, we can say, with potentiality to do. This is what I meant in that sense. That I think it's very smart and very tactically correct, like very, very good to coin this proposition Yugofuturism, because it immediately engages everyone, even the disengaged. Like, kind of, what's that? Or like, it immediately, it's charged. We're all, I am in. I mean that I'm just a neighbor. No, I'm in that. So something in me resonates with it, and it's interesting to see what is it, what this desire is, on one hand, and probably what kind of subject it constitutes or produces, potentially. But just this.
I mean, it's a question for everybody. Yes, Ivan, do you want to say something?
Thank you for the very inspiring conference. I will try to answer your question, as a matter of fact. I think, and it was mentioned many times, that it is a very generational term and perspective, and maybe we can try as an experiment to see which generation is this generation. I mean, it's not my generation. I don't think it's your generation. Sorry for saying it. My connection to Yugo heritage would be nostalgia, and we have heard many times that we are not dealing with nostalgia when speaking about Yugofuturism. But on the other hand, I'm not very sure whether it concerns people who are 20 years old. I'm looking at my students, for example, and I have been teaching for 20 years. So I think it's a very, how to say, precisely defined generation of not more than 10 years. So that's why I would come back to your Pia relativization of of the notion Yugo that you have just made in Yugofuturism, because I think that Yugo is very important. It is full of emotional, libidinal impact, and in a Derridian way, in the referring to his concept of difference, I think yes, you are born after the disintegration of Yugoslavia, but still somehow born in Yugoslavia with Yugoslav heritage. So you are somewhere in between. You are both having Yugoslav heritage and not having Yugoslav heritage. Keeping Yugoslav heritage and not keeping Yugoslav heritage. I mean, there are some students of mine here who are 20. I mean, very intelligent ones, so maybe they wouldn't agree with me. But in general terms, I don't think people who are, like at the beginning of 20s would be very fascinated with anything connected to the concept of Yugoslavia.
It's because now I'm teaching.
Yeah, but exactly. But you are a Yugofuturistic generation who is using your position of power to make an impact on them, and that's perfect. That's perfect. But you are an institutional power for them. But I don't think whether this interest would be genuine if there was no you to invite it. So that's my point. I think that
yes,
Yugo.
If I may, we just had this discussion yesterday with the younger generation. So this is very interesting because we really, yes, it was a question to whom it may concern. But I think that we discussed really nicely then that maybe it is a thing that can concern us all, exactly with finding out what do we want, who we are, and every generation has to do this for themselves, of course. Nobody can do it for themselves, instead of themselves. So, I don't know, this is a kind of our try to reconnect with the lost regional with something that was lost. And regional connections were for sure lost for our generation. I don't know what will this generation feel that is lost for them, that they will try to reconnect with. But I really think that this kind of investment, this kind of desiring investment are really important and are a question of every generation.
Excuse me, sorry. I just wanted to add something which I didn't say. I think that the important element in the notion of Yugofuturism is something that your generation is really feeling, and I'm not sure whether younger generation are feeling the same. And it's a kind of need. I mean, I will simplify it now drastically, but a need for a wider cultural space, for breadth. I mean, and that's what Solo was about from my perspective, and what now. I'm 28 and I got all Prešern and Boršnik awards, and I'm still young, so am I going to continue my professional career directing Celjak, Kranj, Maribor, Gorica, Ljubljana, Celjak, Kranj, Maribor, Gorica, Ljubljana? So this desire for a wider, multi-layered cultural space. And I think, unfortunately, that the generations which are born in these nationalistic surroundings, because it's not the same, especially in Serbia, when your generation in Serbia didn't have religious education in high schools or in primary schools, but new generations, they had, and it made a big impact on them. So this is this Derridian difference which I see between generations which are so close to each other from my perspective, for example, who is 20 years older than you and 30 years older than them. Sorry for being so long.
Yes, I completely agree with
that ultimately it has to do with how do we feel about ourselves now. For example, you cannot think of an Estonian or a Lithuanian who would feel nostalgic about the Soviet Union, and they've been much longer inside Soviet Union than any of us have been in Yugoslavia. So it has to do with, I mean, I think the generational perspective there is what does a certain generation need, and the fact that we still share a cultural space, and the fact that we are not bound to our little republics, and that we have a space where we can sort of, be less irrelevant, plays a role in this. But I think, the experience of the collapse really matters here. And the fact that what we, I don't know, if you go from Triglav to Vardar, there would be very, very different understandings of what the collapse means. Somebody might have gained in the terms of, and the reason why it's very difficult to speak individually about it is because the kind of reality we are facing, the six republics, the social and political reality we live in is quite literally the outcome of the collapse of this country. So yes, we can talk individually, what does it mean for us, but then we can, as you said, we can all emigrate, It doesn't, Yugofuturism is, the Yugo thing really matters because it tells something about us, something that remains in this space that is no longer a space. It's called a region internally, and the Europe calls us Western Balkans, which is an insult. I think it's when we say, okay, there's a need to Yugofy us somehow, it's because we are somehow unhappy with where we are currently, all of us, even the Slovenes, who are doing quite well compared to the rest of us. So the thing is, when we, interestingly, in former Czechoslovakia, there are certain points there, but if you talk to them, it's purely sort of how cool it was. It's not existential for them any longer. Whereas it bears huge meaning for us. As for younger generations, I think this is a really important standpoint, and I think again on, let's say, the outside the Zagreb-Belgrade axis, or tri-axis with Sarajevo, I think language would be a very good indicator. Like, do Macedonians and Slovenes aged 19 speak Serbo-Croatian? Or do they understand it? This is a huge indicator. If they don't, if they can't read from Krleža to Crnjanski, they are no longer in our cultural shared space. And this is a fundamentally important point, because for 100 years or so, we kind of co-developed next to each other. And language is just one indicator. I'm not saying it's crucial, but it's really important for younger generations, because here in let's say, what remained out of Serbo-Croatian, the four of how many, it doesn't matter how many languages emerged after it, there is this link which will necessarily connect us. There is no way to avoid it. When you go to school, you will, you read Gorski Vienac age 12, and it's in Jekarica dialect, right? It's necessarily giving you a touch from others. But from Macedonian, or let's say Slovenian or even Albanian perspective, it's odd. Perhaps you need to ask clearly if somebody's really interested in, why does my city look like this? Why are these streets in square grid? Why are, you need to be a very curious child to understand your connection. If you're for example, Slovenian citizen, aged 15, you need to be really curious to see the link. You'd have to discover it. And I don't know, maybe in 30 years' time, even us who speak the same language might diverge even more. But, I'm sorry for taking so much time. But given the fact that all of us are talking about it and the need for it, it means there's something wrong with where we are now. It seems that there's something problematic here, and we are searching for these identities. We are searching for these Sitzung, Heidegger called it. You know, and yes, we have entire 20th century, which is the pinnacle of our history. There's no question about it. So we kind of return to it, and there is something in it. There definitely is something in it. How it's gonna, you know, what's gonna be the outcome, you know, it's really hard to say.
Borisav, you wanted to say something, yeah?
Yes, I will try to bring some new perspectives to this very complex conversation with no easy answers, and the perspective of someone who's 25 and who had a presentation on Yugo nostalgia. Think of that, what you like. So I consider myself that even though if you look at the whole country of Serbia, Montenegro, and then Serbia, in which I grew up, that was definitely nationalistic, definitely religious, and if we look my immediate surrounding, family, friends, etc., neighbors, that was mildly nationalistic and religious, I nonetheless became aware of the positive sides of Yugoslav socialism, and at the end connected with other colleagues, not only I grew up from the region, not only from Serbia, but from the region, who are people in the 20s, in the 30s, the rebel readers group from every republic in the former Yugoslavia, who see something positive in Yugoslavia and Yugoslav socialism, and who see how maybe some ideas from Yugoslavia can help us form another cultural space, maybe more connected. So yes, that is one perspective, and I think that it's not that our generation doesn't have anything to do with those topics of Yugoslavia. Maybe we're not, I and the colleagues from Rebel Readers and we who are here are not best representatives of our generation, but I still think that we can learn a lot from ideas that came from Yugoslavia. And another thing is that Pia raised this concept of Yugo, if it can go beyond the borders of former Yugoslavia. And I had a chance to speak with some academics from Senegal and from Burundi in June, and who actually not only knew that Yugoslavia existed and the way it existed, but actually knew quite a lot of its history, and who were speaking very positively about Yugoslavia, and they spoke how Yugoslavia was the only European country at the time who not only helped Senegal, Burundi, and other African countries, but invested significantly in the building of the infrastructure of these countries. And they're also spoke very positively about the Museum of African Art here in Belgrade, which is, if not the only, one of the few museums of African art in Europe that has its collection not thanks to colonial robbery, but through gifts that Yugoslavia got from African countries. So I think these experiences, and generally that idea of Yugoslav internationalism and the non-aligned movement, not only the non-aligned movement, but the relationship Yugoslavia had with the East and with the West, can also give an answer to this question. Yugofuturism, the idea of Yugo, should be international, should go beyond the borders of the former country, as it did in the time when it existed. But I also want to raise this question that they should exist within the borders of the former country, to whom this identity, not identity, but this idea, to whom it belongs. Because one of the greatest failures of the Yugoslav project is how it treated the Albanian minority, especially in Kosovo. So I would be very interested to hear thoughts and ideas on Yugofuturism from someone from Kosovo, actually. Either in a critical way, in a positive, in whatever. But I think that's also very important, and to see if we can form, and I believe that we can, some cultural space. What kind of it is it?
Yes, I will I actually feel the urge to come back to the question of language that Vukan sketched out. I am not sure that I agree that it is that important of an indicator, because unfortunately, for me, okay, I already defined it in my presentation, it does have to do with generational affiliation, but it also has to do a lot, I think, with what I would describe in terms of cultural studies as a shared structure of feeling, which I think is quite reflected here in the issue, and it was an important thing for me to learn, because I started brainstorming about my presentation before receiving the issue, and I realized there's like a lot of things that came up to me also came up to other people, and the fact that we here had a lot of similar associations as well. I think it's telling. Okay, I will stop here, but to get back to the language. Yeah, so maybe there is 20 of us in the we, but it's plural definitely, and I think it could be more. But to get back to the language, I'm not sure. Unfortunately, even those who do not speak the language formally exist, that formally exists as separation, are still growing up in contexts that are shaped by maybe to invoke Derrida as well here, that are haunted by the figure of Yugoslavia, because it's completely the political imagination of all of the former countries, I would say, is so stuck. It doesn't know how to move forward. It's only present in discourse of power and discourse of very terrible rulers for the past 30 years. And yeah, I don't think, of course, someone from someone not speaking Serbian or Croatian or not understanding at all would have to speak for themselves. Just like the newer generations, I think would have to ask them if they find something potentially emancipatory or empowering or at least interesting in the idea of Yugofuturism. But still, yeah, unfortunately, this is what we are stuck with. So, yeah, why not try to find a new way of relating to it?
I just want to say something relating also to the melancholia you were speaking in your presentation, because I think that maybe this is really a useful notion, I figure, because I don't know, I had a similar feeling when I went to this residency in Bulgaria, as I go to any of the countries of the former Yugoslavia. It was not so much different for me. I don't feel more connected to the Balkans than I do to the specific kind of periphery which we all belong to. Of course, there are different layers of peripheries, but I think that maybe the common feeling of the peripheries is some kind of loss, some kind of melancholia, and I think that this is what really connects us. It's not the most terrific thing to say, but I think that maybe this loss, we can make something together of this loss. I don't know. Maybe this was what drove me with this concept of Yugofuturism all along. I don't know. I'm just figuring it out. Mladen, and you wanted to say about?
And we have another question here, so just have in mind.
I don't know, who, maybe you want to go first, or Mladen wants, yeah, you go first because you had already one reply, and then Vukan, and then the other.
Okay, just a comment on what you said. I think, to me, this connects the notion of melancholia or grief or loss, connects to one operation of erasure that has taken place. And if I quoted this work by Kadir Atiyat, because exactly I think the notion of erasure there was kind of really taken as something very important at the forefront. And erasure, I think goes horizontally on one hand and vertically in generations. What I want to say is that this rupture that has happened, this crack that has happened, like I remember, I know I have experienced this discontinuity between my parents and my generation, just because they suddenly were inadequate to the present situation. They could not give me anything to advance in my life in the new condition. Like now, of course, I generalize, but like the general outline is this: the feeling was that they are kind of lost more than me in the new situation. And I was in my, I was 9 when the change happened. Oh, so it was, you know, kind of, I was parent of my parents suddenly at the age of 10, 11, because of this kind of freezing. Okay, not to over-dramatize it, but this is one thing that I think we inherit and we repeat. Discontinuity between generations, like we cannot align backwards, and as a result of that we cannot align forward, I think, on one hand. On the other hand, it's the horizontal. What I mean is like also these divisions, this fragmentation that goes on and goes on and goes on, and it's exploited, it deepens, it rots, whatever, it produces more and more pain and misunderstanding. So on the horizontal level, also kind of the same pattern we can observe. And I think the big question is, what happened to us and what was erased, actually? And in a way it was said, you were born in this country and then but you were not. You were assigned to this heritage, but you don't have it, actually. So this is I will stop here, but
Yeah, I really like that you mentioned ontology, like the specters of Yugoslavia emerging where you don't expect them, like, you know, the Hamlet's father and stuff. But I think it has to do with sort of both the kind of international and this peripheral sense that, because therein lies a paradox. So Yugoslavia was our way to be here where we are, necessarily a periphery, but to be relevant on the periphery. And then almost 80 years of Yugoslavia, we decided we didn't want it. And now 30 years later, we are sorry that we are irrelevant once again. So that begs the question, what have we been doing for the past 100 years? And it also reveals sort of, yes, the language issue, and it kind of reveals also problems with that legacy, right? It is Serbo-Croatocentric in a way, in cultural and linguistic way, certainly. If you asked Albanians in Kosovo, they would probably have the worst possible experience with that country. They've been, after all, boycotting that country for the last 10 years of its existence. So it's kind of, you know, when we try to speak in terms of, okay, let's figure out, we live in a fucked up world, let's now, you know, figure out how can we work together, we have to acknowledge at the same time that we've been together for 100 years and it failed twice. There are reasons why, some of them, yeah, sometimes Germany invades, right, and then it collapses on its own, but sometimes we ruin it on our own. So there are problems with that legacy, and that legacy is positive in a way that, yes, you have cities built, we have a magnificent flourishing of culture, but that legacy is, and I'm not talking about wars in the 90s, I'm talking about the Yugo part of the story. You know, if the spectre is coming back constantly, that spectre is, doesn't have to be a positive one. So when we are sort of returning to relevancy through the region, this is sort of the kind of paradox that I was saying in the presentation. So we are all nominally going towards Europe, and you know, the reason why Bosnia and Herzegovina is the only country now from the region that is observer state in non-alignment movement is because they haven't started negotiations with the EU. Once you start negotiations, you can't be in non-alignment movement because you're aligned. So we want to go to Europe, but yet we feel deep sadness that, you know, nobody's going to know our leaders and there won't be crying delegations from Papua New Guinea, coming to our leader's funeral. So this is kind of tension there, right? On the one hand side, Europe is our way forward, and I do agree with that. I do agree with. I mean, 2 republics have managed to reach, the rest of us not yet. And on the other hand side, yes, we need some sort of relevance in our own right. But that's the problem, kind of. And this is not the problem with the concept. It's the problem with us, because we. I'm quite afraid that we actually have no idea what's happening there, and this tension between being integrated and being special is something that we haven't resolved. Furthermore, we have willingly destroyed the sort of century-long aspirations that we've all been going to. So I don't know. That's kind of interesting on one hand side, but problematic on the other.
Can I speak?
Yes, sorry, please.
Hi everyone, I'll be very short. I just wanted to say I'm Sofia, I'm from Macedonia, I'm a theater director. And all of this is very interesting for me to hear, since I'm born in the late 70s and I lived in Yugoslavia. All my generation, we all lived in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia is still very vivid in our memory. And this Yugo nostalgia right now is somehow, I see it as our Yugofuturism, because right now Macedonia has a lot of political problems with our neighbors. We changed our name, as you all know, from Macedonia to North Macedonia because of Greece. Now we have some political problems, actually problems around our history with Bulgaria. And Serbia is our only neighbor that accepts us the way we are, with our name. And Serbia is our safe place right now. Maybe because of this nostalgia, maybe, I don't know, we come here and we are Macedonians. Yeah, so, yeah, and you're right, our young people, like the teenagers, they really cannot speak Serbian. They understand a little bit, but they cannot. But their parents still have this feeling of Yugo nostalgia. And right now we have this big wave for this last, let's say, 7-8 years of young people going to university in Ljubljana, Slovenia, because of this legacy of this big, great country. It goes through generations somehow. So maybe they don't speak Serbian, but they still go in Ljubljana, because my friend, she was thinking that safer place for her child to study is Ljubljana than, let's say, Lyon in France, where the child wanted to go to. But she ended up in Ljubljana, so I don't know, for me this nostalgia is our next Yugofuturism maybe. And I think that it's great that people can come and study about this great country, or country that was supposed to be the greatest, but now it's gone, but still we do have each other somehow, and that's important. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Hana, do you still have something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Vukan. Of course, the sector is not positive, and it's an extremely difficult one. The spectre being Yugoslavia in this case, of course. It was super centralized, as you mentioned. It was also very patriarchal.
Communist dictatorship.
Yeah, it was that. But it did have. Yeah, when I'm thinking, okay, so it has always been difficult for me to find emancipatory moments, but I always try. And when I think about it, I think, they have to do it with ideas such as, I don't know, društvena svojina, or samoupravljanje and self-management. And also the non-aligned movement that Borisav mentioned, and of course the international, the multi-ethnic quality of it. And no, I definitely think we have to be super careful not to idealize it, and it's quite often idealized, which I think is just a dangerous point of view in political sense. The desire to go back, I think it's completely, I don't know, wrongly directed, and it cannot be revived, and we do not it is not our goal it shouldn't be our goal to desire to revive it. But yeah, I think some parts of it can be and need to be reclaimed. I think it can actually like help us move forward. And yeah, I'm not talking about grand gestures or starting a revolution, of course. I think that is self-evident, but yeah, I think that we can find something emancipatory in that can be utilized. Today with the limited means that we have politically. Okay.
I'll try to relate to comment on that. I mean, I will go now to a particular case, which is Bulgaria, but just in relation to that. It's a paradox for me that for 30 years I have not encountered any study, any approach, analytical approach, that really is kind of investigating the, let's say, the structural side of things, how the society was organized, aside of the ideological framework, so to say. I'm not sure that that will bring certain results, but at least, I don't know, I think this is very interesting. For example, I will give the organization of the cultural life. Of course, it was centralized and totalitarian and so on, but what I know from this period and what I know about this period is that there was a quite clear, there was quite clear stance on culture and quite clear modeling of citizens, which we can claim as like, of course, it's totalitarian, everybody should be unified, everybody should be, as factually produced. But this population was educated, there were resources for it all around the country that are still existing here and there, which means libraries, cultural houses, occupations, like it was part of the organization of life, which produced educated, more or less people, adequate in terms of geopolitical situation, of course, I mean, I talk about this side of things. We have the negative, disclaimers about it are endless probably. But so this organization now, for 30 years, is absolutely in ruins, slowly. And actually, I see in front of my very eyes how another type of citizen is formed. This citizen has totally different cultural centers for itself, which, especially in Bulgaria today, these are the fitness, the gas station, the bet, whatever is like game, whatever place, disco club, cafe, maybe that's it. And a certain cities, these are the cultural institutions all around the country, even in the bigger cities. And then, to me, it is, it's not even a nostalgia. I'm rather concerned, hey, what type of citizens do we produce? These people are not workers because they don't respect labor. They think easy money are the goal in life. And so to work, it's like kind of not really the thing. If I will work, I will go abroad. And we have Dr. Alexiev, for example, who is touching upon this, all in the different contexts. I mean, I will not go in so much more detail, but I think there is a structural achievement of bringing certain population into electricity, into, I don't know, into a different type of organization of life, into a cultural advancement, and then, so this disclaimer, this shock that cut out everything achieved at once, I think needs to be still, unfortunately, but it needs to be rethought, because there is much more present and achieved, thank God still kept here and there, then it is claimed, that it is seen, because the new dominant narrative says like everything was shit, start anew, you're like a, fuck. Thank you.
Yes, Vera I think she wanted to ask something first.
Thank you. One thing I wanted to maybe just put out there or warn against. I think that the Yugo part of Yugofuturism is very loaded. and that we are always under the danger of falling back onto known discourses. So nostalgia and issues of nostalgia is something we already know. Post-Yugoslav political situation is something we live through. For me, I think why the concept of Yugofuturism is so exciting is because it offers us an opportunity to get free, to get some free space to individually or collectively or completely in some unimagined yet ways think about something that we can't get rid of. So in an essence, I don't think that Yugofuturism should be about future of Yugoslav memory, or if it is about the future of Yugoslav memory, it should be about counter currents, about moving the currents in some different direction, the ones that we can't stop or control, they're just going, but weighing us down all the time. So this is one thing. But the other thing, which is more important to me, I think that the conversation about generation was very important, and I personally don't feel that it is irrelevant to any future generation, but I don't want to say this. I would love to hear from some people who are. Nadia yesterday had a great point. If she would share it again, or anybody, I would really love to hear what any thoughts you have on the concept.
We had some questions more, and Aleš also, and maybe some young people.
Because I want to clarify something. I would like to clarify something they have already said. I raised the question, among others, about this generational question. My point was not clear enough. I think that, from my perspective, it's very logic that your generation coined this concept, but I do not think that that it does not concern or it's irrelevant for younger and older generation. I'm personally, as somebody 20 years older than you, very happy that somebody coined and made this perspective, because I hate nostalgia personally in any of its manifestations. This is an emotion that I have never felt in my life, and I still think that there is something very valid and important in Yugoslav heritage. So that's how I see the notion, something that is, organically, so to say, coming from your generation, but which is meant for other generations as well, in which other generations could recognize themselves, learn something, or rethink their nostalgic attitudes about the former country. That's why I cancelled the second session of this conference, as you know. It was supposed to be the second session curated by myself with the older generation who will comment upon the notion of Yugo-nostalgia, and then I realized that they would be coming back on Yugofuturism, that they will be coming back on nostalgia and coming back on nostalgia, and that they would be patronizing you, and I said, fuck, we cancel the second session and we give the floor to those who invented the notion that is very, very meaningful to us all, to other generations. That was one point regarding the generational issue. And the other point, I think, that we do not need to discuss the fact what is Yugoslav heritage and that there were good and bad things. It's obvious. I think that the very notion of Yugofuturism indicates that we are referring only to the positive and emancipatory heritage of Yugoslavia. So we are wasting time when insisting on the fact that in Yugoslav history there were some bad things as well. I would refer to, yes, it was a dictatorship, that's true. There were no political freedoms. But on the other hand, and it's different, I think you can correct me, it's different from other socialistic countries because it was really a modernistic project, and that's something we didn't mention. It was a modernistic project. Theodor Kuljic, a famous sociologist, called Tito's regime an autocratic modernism. So it is a modernism which was not developed by democratic tool but imposed. And Bitef was made in this very context. It was somebody decided in 24 hours we need a biggest international festival of contemporary theater. Full stop. And it was launched the other day. So that's, I think, an important thing to see, that when referring to Yugofuturism, we have in mind only these emancipatory elements of Yugo package. And of course, there were a lot of bad sides of the spectrum of Yugoslavia, but the very notion, linguistic and philosophical sense, from my point of view, is referring only to what was positive.
Aleš, sorry, yeah, please.
I don't know, I had so many thoughts, but now I was just constipated as one of the
All the male professors, so it's a gender issue.
a bit. But yeah, I had really like so many ideas while I was listening to the presentations, but I would just like to comment maybe on just few major ones. One is, okay, as this generational thing, which on one hand, I think it's very clear what has happened, because like we have this culture that everyone was mentioning, we have this modernist project, and we have the major awards, and this is one of my favorite topics, like Stadia Award and Pula Film Award, to have again the biggest two examples. Like they gain their importance due to the fact that they were Yugoslav. Okay, they were centralized. Yes, majority of people who got Stadia Award were Serbian male writers. Nevertheless, like after a while, Slovene and Macedonian writers were excluded from it, etc., etc. But on the other hand, whoever now is kind of trying to reclaim this award only for Serbian male writers, it was really very, very wrong. So there is no such thing as Serbian literature. There is no such thing as Croatian film, because it's really pathetic what is being produced there. So on one hand, the people who kind of established the award, mediocrity among them destroyed the country, and they kind of became super prominent in the 90s. So it's kind of a bit generation that you belong to. I mean, not that I pinpoint that. I'm just saying what was kind of from my perspective going on. I know, you reintroduced, this is true.
There was no man who got the award.
No, it's true. But then we have our generation who feel super provincialized in this sense. So I don't want to belong to this culture. So I really obviously don't want to compete, even if I think in neoliberal terms, with just 5 people who exist in this scene. It's just very normal that I feel that my students could also, either they would like to be awarded by provincial awards, or they want to be part of a larger cultural context which they inherited. So somehow for me is this, and then for just a small stupid joke that I thought, like as I was listening to all of this, how could we maybe kind of release this tension of Albanians? There is like this whole album by Dua Lipa, which is called Future Nostalgia. So maybe she was kind of also pointing towards this. As a guy from Kosovo also. So I don't know, yeah.
I have a pretty simple question. Where is technology in the futurism? Because, okay, just let me explain briefly, because when you talk about utopia, I think it's a broader concept than futurism. You can talk about utopia without the idea of future, right? You can read Thomas More and he doesn't say nothing about the future, he just said like this is a known place and you can imagine it like starting from some certain idea of division of labor, right? So there's a certain utopia or idea that doesn't need this idea of future. But when you talk about futurism, I think it's idea of the 20th century, right? From Marinetti to, I think, also Nick Land, I guess, and probably if you want some non-fascists, I guess you can talk about Mark Fisher or something like that. There is a certain idea that the future will come with technology, right? The technology is the figure of development. So I was thinking about where is this technological part in Yugofuturism, because we had an exhibition, I think it was last year, at Marković. It was called, we were there actually, Iskra Delta, and they had this idea that Iskra, this Yugoslavs firm, yeah, it was really somewhat technologically advanced, right, even compared to the USA. So they tried somehow to have this idea of lost futures, to excavate some lost futures that were somehow buried, like during this historical progress or not progress. So they tried to somehow excavate this idea that didn't realize itself fully, so they tried to excavate this lost future that was always connected with the notion of technology. So I'm thinking how is like Yugofuturism connected with, could be connected with technology, and what exactly are these lost futures in Yugoslavia, right? When you talk about Yugoslavia heritage or something like that, for me it's too abstract. What are we referring when you talk about idea of Yugoslavia? Is it like this economic ideal of self-management, or is it like this cultural phenomenon in the 50s, like mass performances or something like that, like this big collectivity? What exactly are we talking about when we talk about like this going back to Yugoslavia? Which elements, which heritage, right? Or is it always just like we don't have anymore, we don't have the same language anymore? So I guess, okay, I kind of broadened it, but my question would be, where is the technology here?
I think it's an excellent question, and it kind of brings a, that there's been brief talk on the environment, so the Anthropocene, so it seems that Yugofuturism is not other people's futurism, which kind of brings us back to that country, which is, but I think Pia summarized it in best possible terms. I think we need Yugofuturism because we are irrelevant. And the strive for not being irrelevant is what motivates us. We are not, I think, in terms of, yes, clearly the utopistic way of thinking is different in the sense when you invoke something from the past that should be kind of futuristic, you would have just, yes, technology, the IT, the AI, the Anthropocene, all the things that are concerning other futurisms are kind of different. Also, Afrofuturism is kind of different because there is Africa, right? When you say Afro, it has geographical, racial, every other possible connotation. When you say Yugo, it is loaded with meaning, but it's necessarily something that is only ours to the, not in short sense, not in the sense only Sixth Republic, but it's something that is related to the existence of that country, that culture, that cultural sphere, the experience of it. So if we say, okay, on one hand side we have this space of experience that we have, and on the other hand we have like the horizon of expectations that we are leading to, and we are somewhere in between. When you invoke Yugoslavia, you necessarily invoke the context in which this country existed. It's really hard to imagine a different concept, because it's really hard to kind of erase the history for it. And it has to do also with the fact that which kind of legacy are we focusing on? We can focus on the good legacy, and we can focus, a unique case in socialism, a country that, from a Stalinist country to all the leaders of the country listening to jazz music. The transition happens only in 2 years. So it kind of brings back to this sort of uniqueness of it, and the unique experience of the country. And this is our place in the world is being invoked more than the world itself, if that makes sense. So the way I understand concept is clearly any futurism we talk about, any other word you put before futurism, yes, technology, AI, data, future of capitalism, Anthropocene, what do we do with oceans, what do we do with, can we divert asteroids if they start hitting us? Yes, unless you put word Yugo in front of it. The minute you put word Yugo in front of it, then it becomes a story about us and our communities and how unimportant we are and how peripheral we are. So it's kind of, this is actually how I understand it. It's the story where we're trying to renegotiate who we are and what happened to us over the last 30, 70, or 130 years. In this sense, I think futurism is a sort of way, what do we do with it? What do we do with the specters? What do we do? How do we align our experience with our expectations? And like, is there a place for us in it? So I think this is the power of such a term, power of such a potential, because it kind of it invites us to discuss those issues from a perspective of our own development, rather than, and in that sense it's a unique futurism. As we said, there are many other futurisms that are all similar. This one is kind of unique. I've never heard of such a futurism.
I think to add something to this comment, the question of futurism, futurism also is asking the question, who owns the future? Like in the case of Afrofuturism, for example, this is, of course, technology seen as it symbolizes progress, it symbolizes development, it symbolizes evolution, and this reclaiming of technology by the Africans, let's say, diaspora, in order to produce art, to imagine futures which are technologically advanced and are voicing their own kind of secluded, minor, silenced stories, is also, I think, an important aspect. So it's not only providing future for, it's just, it's not only having a future, it's also who owns the future. Do we have a future on our own? Can we define our lives on our own terms, basically? And of course it is related to questions of who we are, or who, I don't know what to say, who you are, who we are, I would say still. And it's really, that's why I was bringing and I'm bringing back time and again the issue of, I don't know, like erasure, just, I think there is certain, how to say, this lack of relevance that the abrupt transition has caused, lack of relevance on your own terms. Suddenly you have to learn how to live your life, how to make economy, how to deal with free market, how to do the things right. And I think how to export knowledge, how to invite experts, how to invite advisors or whatever. I think this quest for knowledge on your own, respect towards what you sense as right, what you see, what you can respect to your own judgment and reflection, analysis, whatever you call it, resources. So because I think this is shared as experience, and I see still the damage of this shock, which that's why I call it the process of bringing the dignity back, kind of redignification, but not through nationalism, which is just like we're the chosen one, and whoever is against us doesn't agree, is against us, and we hate him, and like that's the easy way out. That's the abuse of this need. I think on a deeper level, it's another question, at least. What's the future is also the geopolitical question, I guess, coming.
I think that Anna. Yes, Anna, please do. So this would be the last comment, I think, because then we have to stop because the show is about to begin.
Sorry, so just here we go. Hi, thank you all. I have a question mostly for Hana, Borisav, and Pia. If she could jump in, I'm actually eager to kind of pull this conversation a bit back into the body and ask Two things. Firstly, in connection to what Pia was saying yesterday about a lot of the text in the publication engaging with feminism and feminist theory, feminist criticism, I'm interested in Hana's thoughts and Borisav thoughts on how is this paradigm relevant. You've both mentioned José's de Barmonhos, so how do you see this actually, the potential of this in the concept of Yugofuturism? And also more specifically, I'm interested in your experiences as people who engage in independent culture, who read and consume art, and Hana has also mentioned the importance of connecting left melancholy to art and culture. So I'm actually interested in your experiences of what you've encountered or come across as something that in any way embodies some of the ideas of what we can think of as Yugofuturistic. Like, is there something in the contemporary art scene, in contemporary cultural production? Like you've mentioned, Mladen is like an interesting example, but like, is there something in either literature or other fields of art? What does it look like, and does it have this like specificity that distinguishes it from like a more general European trend?
So, wow, okay, what a huge question. But I will be brief, don't worry. So regarding feminism, yeah, I think any line of thought about the future has to be feminist. Exclamation mark, and that's it. That's all I have to say about like it is super relevant. And
of course, but how is it? Is it there? How is it in the thinking of it, and especially also your interest in gender studies or the queer perspective?
But where? In Yugofuturism? Or in Yugoslavia?
I'm interested in Yugoslavia, let's let it go. Now, I'm interested in like your perspective on what Yugofuturism can be. How do you just so I can kind of see it connect?
Okay, so why I invoked Munoz and what I find really inspirational about his approach, and I think that can be used for Yugofuturistic project 3.0 as well. Would be kind of digging through recent history, because so queer history in Yugoslavia and in socialism in general is quite often framed as something that did not really exist, that was the human rights of queer people and their lives are in terrible state, and the LGBT movement originated in the West and it's a capitalist movement. Like, that's quite an often heard argument, and which is completely false. Like, it's not based in fact. So yeah, I think that why I decided, and I'm not the only one that is invoked Munoz. You did, and also some of the authors in Should did. So yeah, I think that kind of both research and experiment, as the one that he does, that kind of gesture, can and should be utilized regarding, like, I always felt the urge to do it myself regarding my surroundings. What is the second question?
Examples of something that can be interpreted or experienced as Yugofuturistic in contemporary art production.
Yeah, I knew I was probably going to get that question from somewhere, but actually now I can't think of any, because this is why I first left Melancholia, which is broader than just the leftist theme. That is why I actually introduced it, because and also the trope of constipation. Because the two main gestures that I see around me are either refusal to deal with that legacy, or what I describe as melancholia. There is no example that I can think of that would draw up the third way.
Thank you for the great and complex question. I will be short, and we can continue some other time. Yes. I think regarding feminism, I think there is no dilemma to say that if we want to be Yugofuturistic, if we want Yugofuturism, the future is female. And we can compare, for example, the two recent wars that happened in the region, the Second World War and the war in the 90s, and the role that women played in these wars. In the Second World War, we had 100,000 women who fought in the partisans, who fought in the liberation movement against the will of male partisans at the beginning, who let them fight at the end because they had no choice. They needed these women, and what huge emancipation that brought. And at the end of the century, we had women forced back into the houses, being raped, being molested, and we know everything that happened in the 90s. And of course, we have these wars as male games, of men who are in power. And if we really look at the feminist ideas and the kind of not unity but collectivism, and what we can have from it also in the female perspective, the feminist perspective, but also in the region, we also move away from this current state of nationalisms and the divisions in the region. And for the second question, as Hana, I think I can't think of any work in our artwork that really embodies this idea of Yugofuturism. Asiana, for example, a very distant connection, and I think it's very interesting to read her and to interpret her writings in that way. But besides that, I'm not sure. Yes, the illustrator. I mean, that's kind of a great example from popular culture, and I really recommend everyone to check it out. But maybe also graffiti art, and Michele Konya mentions that kind of a war that happens between those nationalist graffitis and that inspired hatred, and the other ones on that are Yugofuturist.
I think that all the alarms are up, so that we have to stop. I'm going to censor my question, and maybe we can talk about it. Yeah, when we finish. It's hard to end Yugofuturism, and I promise that this won't be the last words on it. So we'll continue with this group, with that group, with other groups. So. Thank you very much. I think it's been a wonderful today's talking about Yugofuturism, and see you again.